You are about to hear a man who is well known in our community, Dr. Amos Wilson, as he describes what we may call it, if it were given a name: African self-identity theft by the Europeans, in his efforts to reverse the curse. So, just listen and learn.
And reduce the black child's tremendous potential. There is one thing that must happen. That is the separation of African people from their African selves, from their basic African identities. When you have an identity, it is difficult for another person to impose a set of values on you, because having a positive identity and a solid identity is a defense against being penetrated by alien forces. A positive identity functions to locate us in the world, in space and in time and in history. A positive identity gives us a sense of purpose and a sense of direction. A positive identity provides us with self-knowledge and direction. A positive identity provides us with a sense of belongingness. When we say we are African, we are not merely identifying ourselves as individuals. We indicate that we belong to a people, to a culture, to a nation, that we belong to a system of values, a system of perceptions, a system of behavior, folkways and mores. A system, an identity permits us to cooperate with other people. It permits us to understand what role we must play within a particular group. An identity permits us to know our own interests. An identity permits us to provide ourselves with an evaluative system, permits us to evaluate what is going on in the world. An identity provides us with a defense against possession. I've often said that we cannot be African and be slaves and subordinates of other people at the same time. We cannot be fully identified and at one with our African identity and be subordinate to another people. The European, of course, recognized this immediately. That is why when we talk about our slave history, we often talk about the destruction of African culture. We talk about the rewriting of black history as an attempt, again, of destroying the African culture and an African personality. We recognize that the destruction of that personality, the separating of us from our culture, the separating of us from our history, is a separation of us ultimately from our identity. It means a split and a schism is created in the personality. When a schism and a split is created in the personality, the individual is made exceedingly uncomfortable. It is the first rule of brainwashing. When you wish to brainwash a person, when you wish to transform their personality, you break them from their old personality. You break them from their old moorings. You make them question and doubt their previous culture and their previous learning. When you get them to begin to doubt themselves, when you get them to reject their culture, when you get them to see their past lives as negative, when you get them to feel ashamed of that past life, when you get them to feel guilty of that past life, and any good brainwasher knows this, and you check out the Moonies and any other brainwashing organization, you will see this process being put forth. Once you get that, the individual then is left in a tremendous state of confusion, in a tremendous state of ambivalence. That state is painful. It motivates the individual then to seek some kind of relief, to seek some way out. Then it becomes the function of the brainwasher to say, if you follow my way, if you accept my definition, if you do it the way I say do it, if you look at it the way I say look at it, if you value it the way I say value it, then you will feel better. See how happy we are, often in these quasi-religious brainwashing places, you see the people running around smiling, and they're all glory, and they're all happy, and they're all loving, and they're all, and here's this confused person cut off from family, cut off from his community, cut off from everything he's known, and is filled with pain, and yet these people seem to be so loving, they seem to be so brotherly, they seem to be so sisterly, then let me get what they have. And of course these people are here to say, see, if you thought the way we thought, if you look at things the way we look at it, you'll be happy, you'll be one, you'll be accepted. Then often the individual then accepts the values and the orientation of the brainwashing group and then becomes a part of that group. The splitting then of the African personality is a necessary process in inculcating into that personality an alien personality, an alien spirit, creating the personality of servitude. It makes possible then in that African personality, that is the split African personality, makes it possible then for the African to begin to believe the lies, to accept the European distortions, to accept European reality, to accept then the stereotypes the Europeans have projected. And it's very interesting as you ride the subways today, and it becomes an embarrassing event to watch our youngsters use the degrading term they use again and again, so loudly, so unselfconsciously. When I grew up, the idea of using this term in public, the idea of letting white folk hear you using that term, calling one, letting any other group of people hear you referring to yourself by that term, was unbelievable. But now this seems to be the coin of the realm. And we hear it all the time. Yeah, that nigga did it, that nigga that. And, it just goes again and again and again. People must have been destroyed in many ways to talk about themselves in public and to be this way so loudly and so clearly. You must then break the African person from his African identity in order for this to happen. And this, of course, is what happens. Nature abhors a vacuum, we say. In other words, where there's a vacuum, there's an attempt for that vacuum to be filled in some way or another. And of course we see that when we suck sodas with the straw, we create a vacuum, of course, and that vacuum sucks into it whatever we are drinking. When you create a vacuum in the personality by separating the African personality from its African identity, then there is an attempt for that personality to suck into itself something else, to fill its emptiness. When the European then is in control of information, when the European is in control of so-called knowledge, when the European is in control of so-called reality, in control of definition and so forth, it will be these things that are sucked into the African personality. When the European projects lies as truth, there will then be these lies sucked in through the vacuum of the split African personality and accepted as truth. And then this personality, these sucked in lies, these sucked in perceptions, these sucked in distorted views of reality will take on a life of their own. They will take on a structure and an organization and represent themselves as a personality. At that point, the African personality becomes possessed by a spirit. When we hear, as I said earlier, about the black boys and our children talking that language on the subway and speaking the way they speak, in a way it is not they who speak. It is the spirit in them that speaks, using their mouths, using their bodies. When they then believe the lies that they cannot learn as well or better than any other people, when they are afraid to try, when they are afraid of failure, when they are afraid of success, when they are afraid to challenge the European. You see, we talk about racism, but I don't think we are yet really ready to do something about it. Because doing something about it in the ultimate sense means preventing and neutralizing the perpetrators of racism. Ultimately, it means, ladies and gentlemen, removing the Europeans' ability to perpetrate racism in the world. Not getting the European to love us, not getting the European to so assimilate with us or to accept us, but getting the European in a position where no matter how scandalous he is in terms of us, he can do a doggone thing about it. Because we then have the power in and of ourselves to defend ourselves against his insult and against his slander. ultimately then the removal of racism for the world would mean the ultimate neutralizing of European power. But many of us are not ready yet to take on that task. Many of us are still afraid that we are not up to that task, that we cannot defeat the European, that we cannot neutralize the European. So we have opted for some kind of armistice, some type of suing for peace, some type of getting along, because we figure that is the best that we can do. Then in this sense, then we will be continued to be possessed by an alien spirit. And that alien spirit then will speak to us. When we then fail to believe in ourselves as people, it is because that spirit has taken over us, and it says to us what the European has said: you can't succeed. You can't run the world on your own. You're incapable of having a culture. Without us, you wouldn't have VCRs. You wouldn't have TVs because, see, you're not technical, and you know you love it. You wouldn't have compact disc, and you know you're into your music, you see, and you wouldn't have this, and you wouldn't have that. Europeans are mathematically gifted, and you are not mathematically oriented, and Jews can count money, and you don't know how to keep money. That means that there's a spirit in us, and that spirit whispers to us, and it keeps us from attempting many of the things that we should attempt. This can only occur when we have been separated from our African selves. The alienated African then lacks insight and clear, realistic vision of himself and of the world, and finds himself at a loss as how to extricate himself from servitude and damnation. In other words, as long as we accept that alien spirit in ourselves, we will be confused as to how we are going to get out of our situation.
You just heard another powerful message for our black community. Brought to you by John Henry Media Network in the United States of America. This is the place for you, your family, and friends to hear very powerful messages and music from other great black people. For a stronger and a more revolution ready Black America. Because we know that your message may awaken yet another sleeping giant. Contact us today at jahu.enterprises@yahoo.com. I say again, that's jahu.enterprises@yahoo.com, and get your music or message heard by millions for another generous donation today. The next episode will begin in less than 10 seconds. So, keep listening.
I'm not your typical man.